What's happening, guys? It's Nick from S2 Strategic Defense. Hope all is well. I want to do a real quick follow-up video with you guys on the church shooting that happened in White Settlement, Texas, which is just outside of Fort Worth this past weekend. You probably saw it on the news. Some of you guys probably caught my first video on it that went through the surveillance footage of the incident, as well as some preliminary analysis that we could make based on the footage and just a few details that we had. Today, the gentleman who ended that incident gave a whole bunch of interviews with local news channels, gave us a lot of details, so I'd like to share some of that with you guys. I'll put up some clips as we move along from those interviews, so that way you guys can see that firsthand instead of trying to scour the internet to try and find it. And I'll give you guys some details on the bad guy himself. Now, we're not going to be sharing his name, but there are some interesting details about him during that incident that I'd like to share with you, some stuff that we can learn from right away as well. So let's get right into it and go from there. All right, guys, let's start this off by talking about the three good guys involved in this incident. First name I want to mention to you is the hero himself, Mr. Jack Wilson. We're going to talk more about Jack in just a minute. However, he is the person who took that final headshot from about 15 yards out, dropping the shooter literally dead in his tracks, ending the incident, definitely saving a lot of lives. He's also the person who gave several of the interviews today with the local press. We're going to talk about Jack in just a second. Second name I want to mention is Mr. Richard White. Mr. White was the person who stood up. He was wearing a dark colored blazer. He was going to be the first person who confronts the shooter, was trying to reach for his pistol at the 6 o'clock position, and got shot at close range with a 12-gauge shotgun, died on the scene. Our thoughts and prayers go out to Mr. White and his family. I don't know too much about him, but from what I saw and read, he sounds like a very upstanding, much loved, much respected person in his community. So our thoughts and prayers go out to Mr. Richard White. And then the third name I'd like to mention is Mr. Tony Wallace. Tony Wallace was the second person to get shot. However, he was the first person who had the verbal confrontation with the shooter. Mr. Wallace put up a fight, ended up in the hospital. However, from what I understand, he did succumb to his injuries, passed away earlier today. His family came on the media for a short period of time, just spoke briefly about his character. Sounds like a very upstanding gentleman, was there for his communion, and we certainly have him in our thoughts and prayers as well. Let's take a couple minutes and talk about Jack Wilson. Jack Wilson is the hero who ended this incident by taking a 15-yard headshot under all that stress, dropping the shooter, and certainly saving a lot of lives. Now, Jack gave a bunch of interviews today with the local press, very gracious in how much information he gave us about this particular incident. Jack owns and operates his business, which is called On Target LTC, located out of Granbury, Texas. He does the training for the license to carry and concealed handgun license in Texas. From what I gather, a lot of people know Jack. He's very well respected, very well loved in the community, especially in that Fort Worth and surrounding suburbs area. I think he's been around for a very long time over there. Now, Jack himself, a lot of people were saying he's former FBI and all that stuff. Jack, in one interview with NBC Dallas, said that he was a reserve police officer with the Hood County Sheriff's Department way back in the 80s, but he just didn't have enough time to continue down that path. But he does have some training that way, and he's also an instructor under what's called TCOL, Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. I'm an instructor under TCOL as well, so we're very much still connected to the law enforcement community and still doing the training side of things, although he's not an officer and neither am I. In the interviews, Jack gave some very specific information that we're going to get into in just a second about the shooter himself, and it really kind of verifies some of the things that we talked about in my first video. He saw the same stuff that I saw. Now, at the time of the filming of the first video, I said that he was an armed citizen, which he's obviously an armed citizen. However, he is head of the security at that church. We didn't know that at the time. We didn't even know his name at the time. So we were just assuming that he was just an armed citizen. Hey, we live in Texas. We have a lot of armed citizens everywhere. And so, but when we found out the name and he gave some interviews, he is in charge of the security at that church. Jack, if you get a chance to watch this video, I'd like to thank you personally. If we ever get a chance, once all the dust settles, I'd love to be able to talk with you on camera and hear more about this particular incident, about yourself, about your business, and certainly shake your hand for making these heroic efforts during this particular incident. All right, guys, let's take a look at the shooter himself. Now, I'm not going to be sharing his name or his pictures anywhere online, including this video, especially with my massive followings on YouTube and on social media. I'm not going to do this guy any favors by posting his name or his pictures anywhere. Here's what you should know about him, though. Apparently, according to law enforcement, this guy seems to have a pretty extensive rap sheet. He's got a history of violent crimes, including domestic violence, assault, aggravated assault, and so on and so forth. Now, that doesn't necessarily make anybody into an active shooter. However, it doesn't really surprise me. When you start to see that many convictions kind of stack up in violent behavior, and then you see something like this, and it's kind of like, well, I guess I kind of expected that. Now, according to Jack Wilson, when he was giving his interviews, he's got some very interesting behaviors in this particular incident.
When the individual first entered the building, there was concern, kind of the flags went up. The individual was wearing a three-quarter coat, long coat, and had on a fake beard and a fake wig and a toboggan on that. At that point, made the security team members aware that there is, we need to, pay a little more attention to this individual. Went into the audio visual, actually had them turn a camera specifically on him, from that room, where they could actually, watch him. One of the individuals that was, shot yesterday, Richard, is also on the security team. He was sitting behind him about 4 feet to his right on the chairs on the back wall. The individual was sitting in the middle of the back pew on the far south side of the building. After I made sure one of the other security team members was, in position outside in the foyer area, I went in and was standing about 10, 12 feet to Richard's right, just standing at the wall watching the individual. I could see the individual's right hand the whole time. Never saw him do a whole lot with his left hand. He had got up, went to the restroom, come back, sat back down. Then he got up on two occasions, talked to Tony, who was serving communion, waiting on, and then when he sat back down the second time, shortly after that, he stood up, turned, and produced a shotgun. But at that time, Richard and I were both already drawing our weapons. Richard did get his gun out of the holster. He was, I think, able to get a shot off, but it ended up going into the wall. The shooter had turned and shot him and then shot Tony, and then had started to turn to go towards the front of the auditorium. And at that time, when he first, shot Tony, I didn't have a clear window because I had, members that were jumping, going chaotic, standing up. I had to wait about a half second or a second to get a second shot, to get my shot. I fired one round. The subject went down, and he, was there. I went to, cover him. At that point, I kicked the shotgun back behind me, put it against the wall. It still felt like it was, ammo in it. I don't know how many rounds were in it. I don't know if he had any more ammo in his pockets. I haven't been given that information by law enforcement yet. By that time, when I got over there to cover him, there was 5, maybe 6 other individuals that are on the security team that already had their guns out, drawn on him too. The individual did not make any attempt to get up. Instinct, I guess, is the best way I know to put it, gut feel, however you want to call it. There was concern that, there was a possible threat. From the moment he walked in? From the moment he walked in, yeah.
So Jack talks about this incident, and he confirms many of the things that we mentioned in the first analysis video, and he also fills in the blanks with some other things that we simply can't tell from the surveillance footage. So what does he confirm? He confirms that this guy does have some oddball demeanor. He simply just did not fit. It was enough to raise a bunch of red flags, right? He confirms that the guy did use a shotgun. He also confirms that the duration of this thing was anywhere from 5 to 6 seconds. I think I said 5.5 to 6 seconds, and Jack said anywhere from 5 to 6 seconds. So we know that that stuff is all correct. So where did he fill in the blanks? Well, he gave us a little bit more background story. Jack mentions that there's other people there that had mentioned to them that their creep meter's going off, that this guy's giving them kind of the heebie-jeebies enough where Jack himself went into the AV room and asked the staff to put the camera on this guy so that way they could watch him through the surveillance cameras. My honest opinion, again, if somebody is suspect enough that you have to put a camera on them and follow them around, they're suspect enough to intervene early, take them out to an isolated area and make your inquiry there. Not to second guess Jack's decision making, I just feel like early intervention is typically best. Jack also filled in a few other blanks. He talks about how this guy's right arm was perfectly mobile. He was doing all kinds of stuff with it, but his left arm was almost like a stiff arm. He wasn't doing anything with it. I'm guessing that that's where he had the shotgun stuff. Maybe it was up his sleeve with the handle sticking down so he could pull it out of the sleeve and that kind of thing. Jack also talks about how this guy was, again, getting up and having more verbal communication with some other people, really forward, really aggressive. And again, I feel like that's enough merit to make an early intervention. So based on all these things, we know that the red flags are there. If you follow the red flags and you follow that instinct like something's wrong, you're best off to make that early intervention, make your inquiry, or have the authorities do it, right? But if you guys are part of a church safety team, or if you're part of a corporate safety team, don't wait to find out. Just find out, all right? You're better off that way, in my honest opinion. All right, guys, so that's as much of an update as I want to give, at least for right now. I'm sure there'll be some other details that come out in the oncoming days and weeks as law enforcement sifts through all the details. But in the meanwhile, I wanted to give an update to some information from our first video. So there you have it. In the meanwhile, let me close out by saying this. First and foremost, in our first video, there were some folks who know Jack. And if you guys know Jack, please tell him this. Thank you very much for being so committed to protecting your community and your congregation. There's many of us who stand behind you and support you through this, through and through. So thank you very much. And also, if you guys know Jack, put me in touch with him. I would love to sit down with him, ask him some questions, not just about this incident, but also if there's any lessons that he's learned from this incident that he'd like to share going forward. I think that'd be a great video to put together for our friends in YouTube and social media. And lastly, let me just say this. Whether you're a citizen defender, armed citizen, or you're part of some kind of a security or safety team, our communities expect us to perform. That means we have to continually train, refine, and maintain our skills. I would encourage every single person to continually educate ourselves, to learn more, to train harder, to push the limits, and don't be complacent with where we are at right now. Watch the footage from this particular incident, and although it's tragic, it's hard to watch at times. Put yourself in there. Jack himself had family that was in there. His wife was in there, I believe. I believe his daughters were there, his granddaughters were there. So he had generations of family in there. If he didn't perform, who knows what the outcome would have been. Guys, it's our responsibility. In case this kind of a situation ever comes up, our communities expect us to perform, act accordingly. In the meanwhile, guys, I hope you're safe, I hope you're well, and if you guys enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe, comment, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Be safe.